A woman who spent 40 years reading other people's numbers never imagined she would one day need to read her own son's. This is the story of one Sunday dinner in Georgia, a leather folder that held more truth than anyone at that table was prepared for, and a 66-year-old grandmother who refused to become a line item in someone else's loan application. My name is Carol Whitmore. I keep the books for 4 small businesses here in Georgia, and I still wake before sunrise every morning to read balance sheets before my first cup of coffee. People hear that and they picture a woman winding down. I let them picture whatever they like. The text from my son Derek came on a Tuesday. Sunday dinner, Mom. 6 o'clock. It's important. 3 words stopped me cold. Derek called when he wanted to talk and texted when he felt guilty. But he never wrote, "It's important," not once in his adult life. That small phrase sat in my chest all week like a stone I could not set down. By Thursday, a thick envelope had arrived in my mailbox. A refinance package from the bank, my name on the cover letter as guarantor, 60 days to sign. I slid it into my leather folder box. Blood red soft at the corners from years of use, and I brought it with me that Sunday without fully deciding why. The drive to Derek's neighborhood takes 20 minutes through a clear Georgia afternoon. Past the gatehouse, past the guard, who waved me through without asking my name, and more past lawns trimmed to the exact same inch as every other lawn on that street, and a seasonal wreath already hanging on Derek's front door, even though it was only October. I had not decided whether to bring the folder inside. By the time I parked behind my daughter-in-law's car, I had my answer. 40 years of reading numbers had taught me one thing: when a story does not add up on paper, it never adds up at the table either. Diane's car was already there. So was Patrice's. My daughter and my daughter-in-law's mother both present at a dinner I had not been told about until 4 days ago. I sat in my car for a moment and looked at that house. 2 leased SUVs in the driveway, a baby monitor glowing softly through the front window, and there on the refrigerator, held in place by a small lemon-shaped magnet, a single slip of paper I could read from across the room. Montessori deposit, $5,000. Due Friday. I read it once and filed it away. I file everything. What came next I can still replay frame by frame. I have had plenty of time to. They had rehearsed it. I could tell by the way Ashley filled my wine glass before I had even sat down. The house smelled like rosemary and expensive candles, the kind you buy to make a room feel warmer than it is. The kitchen island was a slab of white marble wide enough to land a small plane on, and the table was already set with cloth napkins and a roast that cost more than my first car payment. Everything was arranged. Everything was deliberate. Patrice Ashley's mother sat at the far end with the easy confidence of a woman who already knew how the evening would end. She told us about her cruise to the Greek islands, how the sunsets were extraordinary, how she really must go back. Then my daughter sat 2 chairs away from me and kept her eyes on her plate in a way that told me she had already been briefed on what was about to happen, and did not entirely approve of any of it. Ashley turned to me with a warm smile and said loud enough for the whole table to hear that I had been such a lifesaver with little Liam on Tuesdays, that the baby just lit up whenever I was around. Patrice nodded as though this were scripture. I said thank you, and did not correct her, though Tuesdays as a regular arrangement was news to me entirely. That is how it works, the softening before the ask. You build the pedestal first so the person standing on it feels too grateful to step down. Derek came in loud, the way he always does when he is nervous, filling the room with a story about a deal he had just closed in Charlotte, numbers with too many zeros, a trip to Nashville for a company award. I raised him on store brand cereal and library books, and I have learned to tell the difference between a man who has money and a man who needs you to believe he does. I ate slowly and let him talk. On the refrigerator, under that small lemon magnet, a Montessori deposit slip was still there. $5,000. Due Friday. I filed it quietly away alongside everything else I had noticed since I walked through the door. Dessert was store-bought, a fruit tart nobody had baked, and Derek set down his fork with the deliberate stillness of a man about to make a pitch. He glanced at Ashley, then squared his shoulders and looked at me. Mom, we wanted to talk about Theo, about Liam, about the future. He swallowed once. Daycare is almost $1,300 a month for an infant in this county. We have run the numbers. We need you to retire early. We cannot afford daycare. The table went completely still. Even the baby monitor down the hall seemed to hold its breath. I laughed. not unkindly. Just a small soft sound of genuine surprise, the kind that escapes before you can decide whether to let it. You cannot afford daycare, I said quietly, on $280,000 a year. Ashley's smile tightened just slightly at the corners. It is not about money, Yolanda. It is about family. It is about what is best for Liam. A baby should be raised with love, not by strangers. Beatrice leaned in then right on cue and said that in her family grandmothers step up, that her own mother had raised her children half the week, and it was an honor. I waited one beat and asked very calmly whether her mother had been paid for that honor. Beatrice blinked. I noted the pause. I note everything. I told them I would need a week to review everything properly before I could give them a real answer. The relief in that room was almost physical. Derek exhaled and smiled. Ashley reached over and touched his arm. Beatrice declared she had known all along that family always comes through in the end. They raised their glasses. I did not raise mine. I was already doing the only thing I know how to do when something does not add up. I was counting. That night I drove home through the darkened Georgia streets, sat down at the same kitchen table where I had taught myself this trade 30 years ago, opened my laptop and built a spreadsheet. I had more information than I realized because a guarantor receives everything: pay stubs, bank statements, the full picture. Tab 1 was their cash flow. Gross income $280,000 a year. After taxes and retirement contributions, roughly $16,000 landing in their accounts each month. Real money. More than I ever saw raising 2 children alone after my divorce at 41, when I learned bookkeeping at night, after the dishes were done and the kids were asleep, and made store-brand cereal feel like enough because it had to be. Then I mapped the outflow. Mortgage $6,000, 2 SUV leases $1,400, country club membership $800, dining travel subscriptions, an infant daycare in their zip code, $1,300 a month. I sat back and looked at the total. They did not have a daycare problem. They had a Tahoe problem. Drop 1 lease, pause the club, and the so-called unaffordable daycare fit into their budget with room left over. What they had called a crisis was a choice dressed up in urgency, and the choice they had made was that I should be the one to pay for it, not in dollars, but in years. I made a note in the margin and opened a second tab. But that was only page 1, and the next page was where this stopped being a story about daycare at all. Money tells the truth in its habits. I found their lie in a single line item: $1,500 transferred out on the 1st of every month for 10 months straight. I had been looking at the large numbers first, the way most people do. The mortgage, the leases, the credit line drawing close to its limit. But somewhere past midnight, I went back through the statements line by line, slowly, the way you read a contract when something itches and will not stop. There it was, the same amount, the same date, every single month without exception. The memo field read 2 words: childcare mom. I set my coffee down and read it again. I'm a mother. I'm the grandmother of that child, and I had never received a single dollar from my son or his wife for anything I had done for Liam. Not once, not ever. So the question that settled quietly into the room with me that night was a simple one. If the transfer said child care mom and the money was not going to me, then who was mom? I called a friend from my banking days. The following morning, a woman who still reads transaction codes the way I read balance sheets. I gave her the reference number, nothing private, just the routing pattern, and asked what kind of account it pointed to. Personal account, she said without hesitation. Recurring transfer. Same bank. Looks like a standing family arrangement. I thanked her, hung up, and sat with that for a long moment. $1,500 a month. Every single month since the week Liam came home from the hospital, quietly leaving Derek and Ashley's account like a utility bill they had long accepted. And licensed infant care in their zip code ran $1,300 a month. $150. That was the entire distance between the story they had told me at that dinner table and the truth. $150 a month separated their lie from the reality they had been living all along, a reality in which grandmothers were told to do it out of love, while one grandmother was already being paid to do it out of a checking account. I wrote Beatrice's name in the margin in pencil and circled it once. I was still sitting with that when Diane knocked on my door at 9 that same evening. She was still in her scrubs from a long double shift, her mascara worn to faint shadows beneath her eyes. I made tea and set a mug in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it the way she had as a small child whenever she had something difficult to say, and she did not drink it. She just held it. "Mom," she said finally, "I need you to know that I love my brother. But something is wrong over there. Not just the stress of a new baby, not just money pressure. Something is genuinely wrong. I told her to take her time. She stared into the mug. A few weeks earlier, she had been at their house, putting Liam down for his evening nap. The nursery door was slightly open, and from the room next door, she could hear Ashley's voice. Not the warm social voice she used with friends and family, but a different register, entirely clipped and precise, the voice of a woman conducting a transaction. Diane caught only fragments before stepping quietly back. Getting my mother-in-law's place ready to list in the spring. 3-bedroom in that zip code. What would it rent for? And then the phrase that had kept Diane awake for weeks afterward. My mother-in-law's house. Not Carol's house. My mother-in-law's house. Said the way you refer to something that already belongs to the plan. Diane was crying by the time she finished. I put my hand over hers and told her she was not wrong, and she had not misheard. After she drove home, I went back to the refinance package, turned past the appraisal, past the standard disclosures, and found the supplemental worksheet buried near the back. The header read projected rental income supporting properties. There was one property listed beneath it, one address, mine, a 3-bedroom house. I had paid off at 62 the house where I had raised 2 children alone after my marriage ended at 41, the house that belonged to me in the only way that truly matters, because I had earned every single dollar of it. In the margin, in clean printed type, someone had written available Q2 pending family relocation. I read it twice. I set the page down carefully, the way you set down something hot. My hands were steady. I always make sure of that. Family relocation. That was me. I was the relocation. They had not asked. They had not mentioned it over dinner or dessert, or the wine Ashley had poured so generously. They had simply written my home into their loan application like an asset they had already decided was available, and served me rosemary chicken while they waited for me to come around. I opened a second tab. 2 years of early retirement meant $190,000 in lost salary, a permanent reduction to my Social Security benefits for the rest of my life, lost health insurance, and retirement savings that would stop growing at exactly the moment they needed to compound the most. Labor alone, full-time infant care, priced honestly at the going Atlanta rate of $18 to $20 an hour for 50 hours a week, came to $45,000 a year. I added the columns and looked at the figure at the bottom. $250,000. That was what they had wrapped in rosemary and candlelight and chosen to call love. Then I moved to the third tab, wrote Patris's name beside the 1500, added my home address, and copied the margin note word for word. Pending family relocation. In ink this time. No more pencil. Sunday was 2 days away. I spent both of them building the case they never expected me to bring. They had set the table. I would bring the math. They lit candles for the second dinner. I think Ashley believed that made it feel less like what it was. The table was set more carefully than the week before, a standing rib roast at the center, the good china cloth napkins folded into neat rectangles. Ashley wore a dress and played the role of gracious hostess with the kind of precision that only comes from practice. Patris was already seated when I arrived, composed and certain, the way she had been the Sunday before. Diane sat beside her husband Paul, who kept his hands busy and his eyes low. Derek hovered near the kitchen doorway, refilling a water glass that did not need refilling. And when I walked in, and he finally looked in my direction, he could not hold my gaze. I have known my son for every year of his life, and I know exactly what it means when he cannot look at me. It means he already knows what he is about to do is wrong. I set my leather folder on the table beside my plate. Closed. Quiet. Ashley's eyes moved to it, and then away. "You can put that in the other room," she said, keeping her voice light. "No work tonight, just family." I told her I would keep it close. You never know when you need to check a number. The table settled into dinner conversation the way it had the week before, careful and rehearsed. But this time the performance had a shorter run. Ashley was impatient beneath the polish of it, and by the time the main course was half finished, she set down her fork and looked at me directly. "We need an answer tonight, Carol. The refinance will not wait, and neither will the daycare waitlist. We just need to know you are with us." Derek added quietly that he needed to know I was family. I folded my hands on the table and said that before I gave them my answer, I wanted to return the courtesy they had shown me and review everything properly with sources. Ashley leaned forward then and said the thing she had clearly been saving, the sharpest tool in the drawer, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who believes they have already won. A real grandmother, she said, would not put a spread sheet over her own grandchild. The table went still. I let the sentence sit there in the candlelight for a moment, Let it be exactly as ugly as it was. Then I reached up unhurried and put on my reading glasses. I have worn these glasses for 15 years. And in 40 years of this work, no one has ever been glad to see them go on. I told Ashley she was right, and that we should stop talking about feelings entirely. I pulled the folder to the center of the table between the roast and the candles, and I opened it. Tab 1, I said, and I read it plainly. Their income, their outflow, every number with their own names attached to it. I told Derek he did not have a daycare problem. He had a Tahoe problem. Paul made a sound into his napkin that might have been a cough. Diane looked at her plate. Tab 2, I continued. 2 years of early retirement, $190,000 in lost salary, a permanent reduction to Social Security for the rest of my life, lost health coverage, and the labor itself priced at the honest Atlanta market rate of $45,000 a year for full-time infant care. $250,000, I said, and I put my finger on the total. That is what you have been calling love. Ashley's voice climbed, and she said I was putting a price tag on my own grandson. I lowered mine and told her she had done that months ago. I was only reading her the receipt. Then I turned to the third tab. I read Petrus's name aloud beside the $1,500 monthly transfer, and I watched Derek go very still. His head turned slowly toward his wife. You have been paying your mother, he said, this entire time. His voice carried something in it that had nothing to do with me anymore. Ashley snapped at him not to make it about her. Before they could go further, I placed the final page on the table and said nothing. I simply let them read their own words. One address. My address. Available Q2 pending family relocation. The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it. It had weight. Ashley rose to her feet. Her voice was unsteady, now brittle in the way that comes just before something breaks. We did this for our family, she said. For your grandson. I looked up at her and kept my voice as level as still water. You can afford daycare, I said. You just cannot afford the truth. Her hand came down hard against the edge of the table, and the wine glass cracked and fell red, spreading slowly across Ashley's good white linen like something final, something that could not be taken back. Nobody moved. Down the hall, Liam slept through every word of it, 10 months old, and innocent of all the math being done in his name. I took off my reading glasses and set them beside the stained cloth. Then I gave them my complete answer. I would not be retiring early. I had work I loved and people who depended on me to keep doing it well. I would not be signing the refinance. The bank would hear from me first thing Monday morning, and without my signature as guarantor, that loan would not proceed. The $90,000 I had lent them 3 years ago would be converted to a formal written repayment schedule, and my attorney would send the paperwork within the week. I looked at Ashley and said that a real grandmother does not put a spread sheet over her grandchild. A real grandmother teaches him that love is not something you can invoice the people who give it to you. I picked up my folder, walked past the 2 leased SUVs in the driveway, nodded to the guard at the gatehouse, and drove home through the quiet Georgia dark to the house that belonged entirely to me. The refinance did not go through. Without my signature, the credit line was set to its higher payment, and the math they had been outrunning for years finally caught them. By spring, the big house was listed with the same realtor Ashley had called about mine the previous fall. They moved to something smaller, 2 towns over, 1 car, returned 1 club membership lapsed. The $1,500 to Petrus stopped almost immediately after that Sunday, which told me everything I needed to know about how much of it had ever truly been about family. Derek came to my door alone in April. He stood on the porch a long time before he knocked. He was not yet ready to offer a full apology, and I have long since stopped waiting for people to arrive on someone else's schedule. But he said one true thing. He said he had been so afraid of looking like a failure that he had nearly done something unforgivable. I told him that fear explained a great deal and excuses very little. He nodded, and we sat together on the porch in the cool spring air without needing to say anything more. I see Liam on Saturday mornings now. We go to the public library and choose the cheapest books on the shelf, the same way I once chose them for his father and his aunt, and we read them together on the old couch by the window. I am there because I want to be, not because anyone has written my time into a budget line. The wine stain never came out of Ashley's good linen. Diane told me they eventually threw the tablecloth away. Some marks you simply cannot scrub out. You just stop setting the table over them. Here's what 66 years have taught me. Love is a gift. It is not collateral. It is not a line item. And it is never not what's not ever something you owe someone at the cost of the life you worked your whole life to build. They set the table, I brought the math, and I walked out with everything that was already mine. This story found you at the right moment. If you have ever sat at a table and felt the quiet weight of being someone's solution rather than someone's mother or someone's grandmother, or simply yourself, leave me a word in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have not already, please subscribe to True Stories, the Tragedies, and the Comedies of Life, because every week there is another story waiting. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply know that you are not alone.